It was a quiet morning at the airport when a flight attendant named Sarah was preparing for another busy day. She had worked for years in the airline industry, flying all over the world. Today, though, was different. She was assigned to a flight that carried a very special passenger, a fallen soldier who had died while serving his country. His body was being escorted back home, and Sarah was told that she would have to help with the transfer. But as she received the news, Sarah's heart sank. She had heard stories about how sensitive and emotional these situations could be. Still, she didn't feel prepared to handle it. Sarah hesitated. "I've never had to do something like this before," she thought to herself. She had always felt awkward around emotional situations, and the thought of dealing with such a heavy responsibility made her uneasy. As she walked through the airport, Sarah saw the soldiers' family members waiting by the gate. Their faces were filled with sorrow, and Sarah couldn't help but feel for them. However, when the time came for Sarah to offer her assistance, she made a decision that would soon change everything. Despite being trained to handle difficult situations, she quietly declined the task of escorting the soldier's body off the plane. "I can't do it," she whispered to her supervisor. "It's too much for me." Her supervisor, a veteran flight attendant herself, didn't force Sarah to go through with it, but she gave her a disapproving look. Sarah thought that perhaps it was just an awkward moment, but little did she know, this decision would come back to haunt her in a way she couldn't have imagined. The plane touched down, and the passengers began to disembark, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding behind the scenes. Sarah kept her distance, her hands shaking slightly as she arranged the in-flight beverages and snacks. She kept telling herself that it wasn't her fault, that she was only trying to keep her composure. But as she looked over at the soldiers' family, sitting quietly in their seats, Sarah couldn't help but feel a rising sense of guilt. The soldiers' family members had been sitting in silence, holding hands as they gazed out the window. Sarah thought about how much pain they must have been in, how much they were suffering. She started to feel selfish for not wanting to be involved, even though it was her duty as a flight attendant. As the final passengers exited, Sarah was left with nothing but the weight of her decision. She was asked once again to help, this time to escort the soldier's body off the plane. This time, Sarah couldn't say no. As she slowly approached the small section where the body was kept, she was reminded of the immense responsibility that came with her job. Her heart pounded in her chest, her stomach tied in knots, but she forced herself to step forward. The soldier's family followed close behind her, eyes filled with gratitude. It was then that Sarah realized that she had made a huge mistake earlier. It wasn't just about her, it was about honoring the sacrifice made by the soldier. The guilt she felt weighed heavier than she could have ever imagined, and she knew that she had let the family down, and herself too. As Sarah slowly walked down the aisle of the aircraft with the soldier's body in tow, the reality of the situation hit her harder than she expected. The weight of the soldier's sacrifice was no longer just a story she had heard. It was real, and she was now part of the journey that would bring him home. She could feel the eyes of the other crew members on her, and there was an unspoken understanding that this was a moment that required utmost respect. Sarah's chest tightened, and she couldn't help but glance at the soldier's family behind her. They moved quietly, following the body with a dignity that made Sarah feel small. The quiet sobs of the family echoed through the hallway of the plane, but the silence that followed was even louder. Sarah tried to focus on what she was doing, but it became increasingly difficult. Every step felt heavy, as if she were carrying not just the soldier's body but the weight of the regret she felt for not stepping up earlier. When they reached the designated area to unload the body, Sarah was told that she would need to help the family onto the transport vehicle. As she stood there, frozen for a moment, The full gravity of her earlier decision started to settle over her like a dark cloud. She could feel the cold sting of judgment from her colleagues who were now watching her closely. Sarah had always prided herself on being strong in tough situations, but today she felt weak. The family, however, showed nothing but grace, offering Sarah a small nod of understanding. They didn't blame her. Instead, they showed empathy, even in the face of their grief. It was then that Sarah realized something important. She wasn't just there to assist with a body. She was there to offer respect and comfort in a time of profound sorrow. In those few moments, Sarah learned a lesson that would stay with her forever. Sometimes, it's not about being perfect, it's about showing up when it matters most. As the family loaded into the transport vehicle, Sarah watched them disappear from view, their grief palpable. She stood there for a moment, staring at the empty gate. It felt as though the weight of the entire situation had settled into her bones. She couldn't shake the feeling of regret that lingered, like a shadow that refused to leave. The rest of the crew returned to their duties, but Sarah's mind was still back with the soldier's family. She replayed the moments in her head, wondering if there was more she could have done, if she could have handled it better. She had spent so many years working in the airline industry, but this experience made her realize how much she still had to learn about compassion and responsibility. It was easy to think of her job as just another set of tasks to complete, but today had changed her perspective forever. When Sarah returned to the crew room to prepare for the next flight, her supervisor, who had been watching her closely, approached her. "I know it wasn't easy," her supervisor said gently, "but what you did today was the right thing. You stepped up when you needed to, and that's what matters." Sarah looked up, surprised by the kind words. "I should have stepped up sooner," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have helped them from the start." Her supervisor nodded. "We all make mistakes, Sarah. The important thing is that you learned from it and did what was right in the end. Sometimes we can't control how things unfold, but we can always control how we respond." The words hit Sarah like a wave, washing away some of the guilt that had been building inside her. It wasn't too late to make things right, and though the experience had been painful, it had also been incredibly meaningful. She had been given the chance to be part of something much bigger than herself, and for that, she would always be grateful. As the day wore on, Sarah couldn't help but think about the soldier, his family, and the sacrifice he had made. It was a thought that stayed with her long after the plane had landed and the passengers had disembarked. She began to realize that her role as a flight attendant was not just about ensuring a safe and comfortable flight, but also about being there for people during the most challenging moments of their lives. She had been so focused on the routine of her job that she had forgotten what it truly meant to serve others. Sarah understood now that every passenger, every situation, was unique and deserving of care, respect, and attention. That moment of hesitation, that moment of refusing to escort the soldier, had shown her that sometimes doing the right thing wasn't easy, but it was always worth it. Later that evening, Sarah sat down with her colleagues to debrief. She was quiet, still processing the emotions of the day, but she felt a shift in her heart. One of her fellow flight attendants, Mark, had overheard the conversation between Sarah and her supervisor. He pulled Sarah aside and said, "You know, Sarah, I've been on flights like that before. It's never easy, but it's one of the most important things we do as a crew." His words were comforting, but they also helped Sarah understand that it wasn't just about her individual actions. Every crew member played a part in ensuring that the family and the fallen soldier were treated with the utmost dignity and respect. It was a shared responsibility, and though it was emotionally difficult, it was something they all had to be ready for. Sarah nodded, grateful for the support of her colleagues. As she reflected on the day, she realized that despite the emotional toll, she was proud to be part of a team that could rise to the occasion when needed most. The next few weeks were challenging for Sarah. Though she had made peace with her decision to help the fallen soldier's family, the memory of that day lingered. Every time she boarded a new flight, she couldn't help but reflect on how she had reacted in the past, unsure of whether she was capable of handling the heavy moments that might come her way. It wasn't until one afternoon, on a routine flight, that Sarah would experience a moment that would further shape her growth. She had just finished preparing the cabin for takeoff when an elderly woman sitting near the window caught her attention. The woman's eyes were filled with tears as she clutched a small framed photograph of a soldier in her lap. Sarah, recognizing the weight of the situation, approached the woman with a soft smile. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked gently, kneeling beside her. The woman looked up, her eyes welling with tears. "This was my son," the elderly woman whispered, her voice quivering. "He was killed in action a few months ago. I'm flying to visit his grave for the first time since he passed." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She felt a deep connection to the woman, recalling the soldier's family she had assisted just weeks before. The elderly woman's sorrow was unmistakable, but there was something else in her eyes. Strength. She had carried this pain for months and was now on a journey of her own. Without hesitation, Sarah offered her hand. "I'm so sorry for your loss. If there's anything you need during the flight, I'm here for you." The woman smiled through her tears, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt at peace with her role as a flight attendant. She knew that her job was about more than just serving meals and drinks. It was about offering kindness and empathy when people needed it most. The rest of the flight passed in silence, but for Sarah, the hours felt like they stretched on forever. As she moved through the cabin, she couldn't help but keep an eye on the elderly woman who had drifted into a quiet sleep, still clutching the photograph of her son. Sarah reflected on how this job, which she once thought of as just a routine, had started to feel more like a calling. She wasn't just a flight attendant anymore. She was part of the passenger's journey, sometimes through the best moments of their lives, and sometimes through the hardest. The emotional weight of being there for others had become clearer to her, and she had learned to appreciate the deeper meaning of her work. Her role had evolved into something much more personal. She was no longer just helping people reach their destinations. She was now a part of their stories, offering them comfort, understanding, and a little light in their dark moments. When the plane finally landed, Sarah helped the elderly woman gather her things, offering a gentle hand as she escorted her off the plane. The woman turned to Sarah with a grateful smile, her eyes still red but filled with a sense of peace. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've made this journey a little easier for me." Sarah smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was moments like this that reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place. It wasn't the glamour of the job or the destinations that mattered most. It was the impact she had on the people she met along the way. As the elderly woman walked down the jet bridge, Sarah stood by the door, watching her go. She felt a renewed sense of purpose in her heart. Every story, every passenger, every moment, it all mattered, and she was ready to face whatever came next with compassion and strength. One afternoon, on a routine flight, Sarah was called to assist a young man who was visibly shaken. He was sitting alone, staring out the window with a distant look on his face. When she approached him, she noticed his hands were trembling, and his breathing was shallow. "Are you all right?" she asked gently, sitting down next to him. The young man turned to her, his eyes wide with fear. "I'm not sure if I can do this," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm on my way to see my brother. He's been injured in a car accident, and I'm afraid I won't make it in time." Sarah listened carefully, her heart aching for him. She knew the feeling of fear and helplessness all too well. "You don't have to go through this alone," Sarah said softly, offering him a comforting smile. "I'm here for you. Whatever happens, you have support." His expression softened, and for the first time during the flight he seemed to relax. As Sarah continued to check on him throughout the flight, she realized that sometimes it wasn't about offering solutions. It was about being there, sharing the burden, and reminding people that they weren't alone in their struggles. On another flight, Sarah found herself facing an unexpected challenge. As she walked down the aisle, she noticed a young mother sitting with her toddler who was crying uncontrollably. The mother was exhausted, her face marked with the strain of trying to calm her child. The other passengers around her were shifting uncomfortably, some looking at their watches, others exchanging glances. It was clear the situation was becoming tense, and Sarah could feel the pressure mounting. Without hesitation, she approached the mother. "Hi, is there anything I can do to help?" she asked, her voice gentle. The mother looked up, her eyes filled with frustration. "I've tried everything. He won't stop crying. I don't know what to do," she said, her voice cracking. Sarah could see the exhaustion in her eyes, and she knew that this moment wasn't just about a crying baby. It was about a mother feeling overwhelmed and helpless. Without missing a beat, Sarah knelt down beside the child and spoke softly to him, her voice calm and soothing. "Hey there, little one," she said, offering a small toy she had picked up from the galley. "Do you want to play with this?" To Sarah's relief, the child's crying slowed, and soon his attention shifted to the toy. The mother let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you so much," she whispered, her shoulders relaxing. Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction. She realized that sometimes the smallest gestures could have the biggest impact. It wasn't always about fixing the problem. It was about offering the right kind of support in the right moment. By the time the flight landed, the mother was calmer, and the child had drifted off to sleep. Sarah had learned something vital that day. The ability to remain calm and compassionate in the face of others' stress could change the course of a moment. And that was what truly mattered. The plane began its descent, and as Sarah moved down the aisle one last time, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The flight had been a difficult one, but it had been full of moments where she had been able to make a difference, no matter how small. It reminded her that her job was never just about the tasks at hand. It was about people. It was about recognizing that behind each face, each story, there was a human being who might need help in ways that weren't always obvious. That realization had made her a better flight attendant, but more importantly, a better person. She had learned to embrace the unpredictable nature of her work, understanding that some days would be easier than others, but every day offered a new opportunity to make a positive impact. As she watched the passengers gather their belongings and prepare to leave the plane, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had faced some of the most difficult and emotional situations, but she had come through them with a newfound strength. She was no longer afraid of what might come her way. Instead, she was ready to face whatever challenges arose, knowing that her role was to offer comfort, respect, and kindness. The soldier's family, the elderly woman, the young mother, all of them had left an indelible mark on her heart. Sarah realized that her work was not just a job, it was a responsibility to those who needed it most. She wasn't just a flight attendant, she was a quiet source of support for those in moments of need. And with that, Sarah took a deep breath, ready for whatever the next flight would bring. On the following flight, Sarah found herself walking down the aisle with a sense of calm and purpose she hadn't felt before. As she passed each row of passengers, she saw familiar faces, some excited, some anxious, others lost in thought. Sarah could sense the different emotions that filled the cabin, but this time, instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt more equipped to handle whatever came her way. She had learned that no matter the situation, it was important to listen and show up for people when they needed it most. Sarah's confidence had grown, not because the job had become easier, but because she had learned to embrace the challenges. She understood now that moments of hardship were an inevitable part of life, and what mattered most was how she responded to them. The flight was smooth, and as she served drinks and snacks, she took a moment to connect with the passengers in a way she hadn't before. She shared a smile with a nervous traveler, offered a listening ear to a man who had been traveling for hours, and reassured a couple worried about their connecting flight. Every interaction, no matter how small, was a chance to make someone feel seen and heard. By the time the flight was nearing its end, Sarah had realized that she wasn't just there to do her job. She was there to be a part of the journey that each passenger was on, offering a small but meaningful moment of kindness in an often fast-paced world. And with that thought in her mind, she felt a quiet sense of pride in what she had become. Not just a flight attendant, but a person who truly understood the value of empathy and human connection. As the final passengers disembarked and Sarah made her way back to the crew room, she paused for a moment, reflecting on the journey she had come through. Her heart felt lighter now, not because the job had become less demanding, but because she had found a deeper sense of meaning in it. Each person she encountered, each story shared, had become a reminder that life was full of moments both beautiful and painful, and sometimes simply being there for someone was the most powerful thing you could do. Sarah had learned that the true essence of her job wasn't in the smooth flights or the easy days. It was in the moments that tested her, the ones where she had to step out of her comfort zone and embrace the discomfort to help others. With a deep breath, she looked around the crew room at her colleagues who were already preparing for their next flights. They were all part of something bigger, a team that helped people through some of the most challenging moments in their lives.